Mm. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Dr. Patty Cross, and this talk that we're about to give had its beginning when Dr. Cross and I had the privilege of attending the health convening of the Equal Justice Initiative down in Birmingham, Alabama last year. The Equal Justice Initiative team, Dr. Stevenson, invited people that represented various sectors of healthcare and healthcare education in the Southeast to gather and kind of imagine what would health justice look like in our spheres of influence, and how would we go about creating that. So then later, as I was working on a curricular initiative, I had the great pleasure and delight of meeting Dr. Kiana Johnson, who has a lot of expertise in the area of healthcare disparities, and that's her research interest. And now we're working together on a series of educational experiences on this topic for the new med school curriculum. So it was natural that we felt like, wow, we really want to invite Dr. Johnson to be part of this presentation as well, because we felt that she would really enrich it by her perspective. So we're grateful for our team. So now Dr. Cross is going to invite you to do a little thinking about, our title. What's health equity? What does it mean?
So I am sure in this time of like 2+ years post Zoom engagement, everyone is familiar with audience response kind of platforms. And so if you haven't noticed before, at the top of this slide, there are directions. We would ask that you please go to www.menti.com. And once there, and you can use your phone, a laptop, a tablet, it doesn't matter. Once there, it'll ask for a code, and that code is at the top here, 4768663. I'll give everyone just a minute or so to kind of get logged on, and we'll go to our first question. So if you would, this is in the form of a word cloud. You can submit up to 3 different words. But just to get us started off and get our brains kind of working in a particular space, in your own words, what does equity mean to you? I will remind everyone that so this is the kind of normal rules of a word cloud. The larger the word, the more times it has been submitted. So just the things that are kind of jumping out are parity, fair, and justice. Slightly smaller, but not significantly, are things like unbiased, fairness, needs met, and opportunities. Dr. Johnson, would you like to say
Yes.
this?
Equity, it recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome.
Thank you.
And this is noted just by the World Health Organization.
So kind of taking this one step further in thought process, next slide, how would you define health equity?
If you just joined, you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 47686663 on your phone or tablet or laptop, and you can participate in this word cloud.
So thank you all for participating. I assume at least some of you are eating lunch, so I thank you for using your fingers and thumbs during lunch. So a couple of themes that I'm beginning to see. One of them is access, and I certainly think that that is one of the words that often comes up when we're talking about health equity. Someone says accessibility, kind of essentially another way of saying access. External factors affecting health of a population are addressed. So kind of on a broader scale, multiple different things that may play into, which we will get into in just a second, and addressing those. And then last one, someone saying no one is disadvantaged from a healthcare provision standpoint. Dr. Johnson, what would you like to add with this one?
Yes, so thank you. The Center for Disease Control defines health equity as the state in which everyone has a fair and just opportunity to attain their highest level of health. And achieving this, it requires focused and ongoing societal efforts. And it's mainly just to address the historical and contemporary injustices and overcome economic, social, and other obstacles to health and healthcare. And ultimately, these things eliminate or prevent health disparities.
And so we'll certainly, we will get into the idea of social determinants of health. This is a phrase that is being used a lot in health education. But yeah, sort of looking at the impediments to receiving equal and fair care to provide health and wellness. If you're just joining us, thank you for coming. If you would log in to menti.com, we're doing some interactive slides. The code to enter is at the top of the slide. And our last interactive slide in this section of the talk just asks in your own words to describe health disparities. So as we suspected, this is probably going to require larger text, larger amounts of text. So first, inequity in treatment and access. So again, sort of getting back to this concept of access to care, to healthcare and other health-related resources. And I think that is another word that we will talk about a good bit is resources. Next. Someone says things that prevent you from getting the best healthcare as an individual or group. And then lastly, social disadvantages. Again, kind of going back to the social determinants of health, kind of that will be addressed in today's discussion for sure. And next we have someone says unequal or non-access to services, medications, providers, etc. that promote optimum health. So again, kind of, I think access is a recurring theme today. Dr. Johnson, any thoughts on this last slide?
Yes, so the Center for Disease Control, it defines health inequalities as the difference, health disparities as a difference in health differences or disparities that are systematic, unfair, and avoidable. And the World Health Organization also denotes that these disparities, they also involve more than the lack of equal access to the needed resources to maintain or improve your health outcomes, but they also refer to the difficulty when it comes to inequalities that infringe on fairness and human rights, the norms of human rights.
Well, Dr. Johnson, I think that definition provides an absolutely perfect segue into our next slide. And so first, we want to thank everybody for participating. We will have some participation slides at the end to kind of wrap things up. But at this point, I'd like to transition to Dr. Johnson and allow her to show you the most incredible slide and talk through the complexity that is the topic that we're going to be talking about today.
All right, so now we're thinking about these concepts. Let's unpack where we find ourselves today. Now, as you see, the first thing that I noticed when looking at this diagram, like, wow, it's messy, it's complicated. And this is exactly where we are. In starting with just a little bit of history, so health equity, it's often underemphasized or absent in core curricula. And despite the fact that 50% of an individual's overall health is influenced by socioeconomic and environmental factors. Now, when we examine this diagram, we see how social determinants of health, they really drive health outcomes at every age and every stage of life. The Center for Disease Control, they define social determinants of health as conditions of the places where we live, learn, work, play, and play that affect our health risks and our health outcomes. And they include economic stability, health and educational access, and quality, neighborhood and built environment, and then also social and community context. Now, within this diagram, I'm just larger. We see, so some reasons why health inequity exists include individual and systemic bias and disadvantaged groups, historical mistrust of clinicians, or even the healthcare system, or low health literacy. So whenever we talk about health risk or health disease or disease management is discussed, when we talk about these different things, health equity, it should be and must be integrated within this dialogue. And so in thinking about the social determinants of health, we also think about how social determinants affect all populations. They don't just, they shouldn't be talked about as if someone has social determinants because they're not a disease, it's not an affliction or anything. Social determinants, they impact everyone. And mostly when you're looking at this, you see, as I interact with these different systems, so within the existing systems and structures, going through the healthcare system, or even with the different variables listed within the social determinants of health, so insurance status, healthcare access, and changing factors, it influences my attitudes and perceptions about these different things, as well as health, which are listed at the top, as you can see. And so these different arrows, they're cyclical, they're going around in circles as the influence is going through the different stages and ages, and it continues to influence going back into the next age, and how the attitudes, they come from these interactions and experiences within the systems, but then they also influence these future behaviors of what one will choose and choose not to do. So the beliefs and attitudes, as I mentioned before, of individuals, it's a key driver of how or maybe even when a person will choose to do something, but it doesn't always tell the complete story. So sometimes from outside, as we're looking in, it doesn't appear that these barriers or that any of these would exist for an individual. Yet you would think, oh, they have all these different things, but they're not still engaging in a certain type of behavior or an activity. But that's when you look at the different experiences or barriers of individuals within a social environment could play a factor in that. And if you all would like to add something to that as well, Patty or Brian?
No, I think that was very well said. What I hope everyone gets from this is this, the reason this is so hard to do something to is that it is a very complex problem with multiple entry points and exit points. And I think what Patty is about to describe on the next slide is where we hope our impact will be in the educational realm, but realizing that there are multiple other places downstream from what we hope to do with our students that may or may not support, or even worse, go against the things that we are hoping to do with our students.
So, so what this slide is trying to tell us is, even though we know because of our belief, our value, that equity is something that should exist, equity and justice, we know from our understanding of like science and genetics, race is a social construct. It's not a biological construct. And therefore, we must conclude that it is racism and its different multifaceted impacts on the social determinants of health, not something biological about race itself, that is contributing to health disparities that exist between certain groups. So kind of at the top of this, we have to acknowledge that the reality is that all of our systems, including our healthcare system, were birthed and they are grounded in a society that was built on slavery. So these healthcare institutions formed in this context, and in spite of the health justice work of later generations, our existing healthcare system, like our hospitals and our medical schools and research institutions and provider networks and insurers, still retain systemic vestiges of this racial caste system that have persisted, especially here in the Southeast, but all over. They've persisted long after, emancipation is a long way in the rear view mirror, Reconstruction a long way back there, but these vestiges are still found. And whether they are due to policy biases or personal biases or mistrust, they end up creating inequities in the access to healthcare and the delivery of healthcare to people of color. People of color just get different care, and they get it less. And these differences are really well documented. Like, this is not speculative. And these differences contribute to the unnerving fact that the United States has the worst health outcomes of any developed country in the world, despite the fact that healthcare in the United States costs more than healthcare in any other country in the world by a lot. So as we considered these matters, as we were thinking about this, we started wondering, can we provide educational experiences to at least to our students here in such a way that they become change agents in this system? Can we train them in such a way that when they go out to their communities as fully trained individuals, they can't unsee these disparities? They are just glaringly obvious to them. And so that maybe they have some tools and some knowledge that they can bring to bear on it. Like, so we're, as we look at this schematic, you can see that our influence place is a little dishearteningly indirect, right? We're not in the big systems where we can influence that. And we're not like CEOs or something of a hospital network, in case you didn't notice. But but we do have, a little in our little corner of Northeast Tennessee, these learners, and they're going to be the workers that go into these healthcare systems. So can we do that? And but we're not. They are going to be entering a system that has an entrenched culture that continues to perpetuate these inequities. They're going to have an uphill battle, because the negative modeling by people already in the field maybe could overwhelm the best practices that we teach them. And the big bureaucracies of the political bureaucracies, healthcare bureaucracies, financial bureaucracies can make change seem impossible. So it's a tall order. But I like to think that two things that are most transformational in the world are love and education. And that we believe in the energy and the vision of our trainees and their passion, that they're kind of like our best hope. And so we're grateful that we're from our little position here, we have a bit of influence on the curriculum, at least in our little corner of Northeast Tennessee. So Kiana's going to talk about how we were thinking about doing this.
I just want to add one thing. I think between the last two slides, one of the things that probably strikes most people is that there are obvious partners that will be required for us to do this as well as possible. So partners like in our area, valid health system, the political structures that maintain power and therefore processes, payers like Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, etc. These are all people who, to move this as far as we would love for this to go, we need those people at this table of discussion as well.
So some ways, just in terms of general principles that we're trying to do this, is one, integrating integrating throughout rather than infrequent, like just one drop special topics. So instead of integrating something pertaining, instead of integrating just social determinants in terms of just one chapter, just seeing how it should be woven throughout an entire curriculum, seeing how just that these different determinants influence outcome throughout the life course, and how its influences are ongoing as well. But then also looking at how it's taught, so how these courses are being taught by a diverse faculty and colleagues that bring in different perspectives that we can all respect and learn and grow from those different things. And then lastly, taking opportunity in season and out of season.
One way that's been kind of publicized a lot in medicine is the point that like different healthcare findings in like medical textbooks and stuff are like always illustrated in people with light skin. So maybe make sure that we include images that show the same disease or the same, finding in what does this look like in pigmented skin? And then also kind of highlighting normal variants that could be confused for a pathological problem. Like there's a normal variant of a brownish colored tint to your sclerae, well, your conjunctiva really, that could be mistaken for jaundice, maybe even result in like stigmatization of a person or something like that. And so just recognizing just stuff like that in terms of representation. Another way that we can do this in curriculum is we use a lot of cases in teaching in healthcare. So like clinical cases. So use cases that highlight diversity. In this news article depicts a dear friend of all three of us presenters and a wonderful recent graduate of Quillen, Dr. Camille Harvey Bogan, who while she was a student, she developed a really cool case simulation of a sickle cell patient with a painful crisis. And it not only helped us teach about sickle cell disease and how to treat this problem, but it also let us highlight some disparities, which included well-documented disparities in, sickle cell crisis is an extremely painful problem. It's excruciatingly painful, but it's well known that Black people are undertreated for pain. So they're sort of, their needs for pain medication are ignored during this. And we could highlight that, as well as disparities that we uncovered in the process of Camille developing this case, that about how little data is actually, how little research has been devoted to optimal management of this problem in terms of like fluid resuscitation. There's like no data on it. And that seem to us to be a healthcare disparity as well. And we are also, Dr. Johnson and I are also working together on a series of cases that'll be used in a whole series on healthcare disparities in the new Trails curriculum at the medical school. And so we're going to have special the populations cases that pertain to Native American identity, Black identity, LGBTQ identity, and also health disparities related to socioeconomic status, low socioeconomic status, and geographical positioning in Appalachia, and how each of those things, there'll be cases on each thing, and how they contribute to these disparities as part of this different healthcare series, moving through the different social determinants of health that Dr. Johnson described. And even little simple things like you're going to have a case and you have to have a bit of background for the case. Just say, have the person be in a married gay couple or something like that, just to be like not having that as the focus, as though it were some sort of pathology of the case, but to have that as just background, like this is normal. And so some of that can increase representation in our courses and curricula as well. Now Brian's going to tell you about another thing we can do.
I just want to highlight one of the things that Patty said about the pain. This is a great example of there is a ton of research to show when providers are asked, still to this day, that I think the last time this series of questions was asked was about 5 years ago. And they were polled primarily in residents. So these are people who have graduated from the college, from a medical program, and are in their residency program somewhere between first and third years. And a majority of those people, graduate medical learners, believed that Black people experienced pain differently, that they experienced it less than someone that is white. And there is a great example of, there is no physiologic justification for that, but there is a clear sort of woven through process of thought that still is in our educational structure and systems that then impacts how we care for patients.
I want to just point out one thing before you change slides. If you look at the mannequin, you can see that their skin is fairly fair. They were, so we do not have a high fidelity mannequin that is a person of color. So this mannequin was billed as being sort of a medium tone of skin, but as you can see from the photo, it doesn't look very medium, and we tried to enhance their identity to make them have, a characteristic hairstyle or something like that. But so we could, infrastructure also matters in representation, and so that's something to keep in mind.
Another one of the hows is just simply using quotations from diverse role models. These are examples from the interprofessional education curriculum. This is specifically taken from the very first time we gather our students. So if you're not familiar, IPE is a process at the university where we bring students from all 5 colleges in the Academic Health Science Center in an attempt to put them into teams, and over a 2-year process, try to integrate the concepts of team-based care. And so the very first time we meet, we specifically are talking about implicit bias in healthcare. First, as it relates to one another. So this is what a medical student thinks about a nursing student. This is what a nursing student thinks about a pharmacy student, et cetera. In addition to implicit biases about various healthcare providers and the patients and vice versa. Implicit biases that the patient may bring to the healthcare environment, mostly based on that first slide that Dr. Johnson was talking about. So all of these experiences lead to biases that the patient will have about the care team. So just one example of these quotations that we put in front of the students to talk about the importance of equity within the care team, as well as the patient being part of the care team. I think my favorite of these is the one at the bottom that just simply says, and I say this a lot to students who are willing to listen, equal rights for others does not mean less rights for you. It's not a pie. It is not a zero-sum game. I think this sounds completely and totally, well, of course, kind of in your mind when you speak it out loud, but I am still amazed at when you push on this door, how much interesting discussion you get from students, that the perception is that it is a pie, that there is, if I give up something. And I think you got to have a discussion around this process about power and control. It's at least in the IPE world, that is a lot of what we're trying to do is move from a hierarchical structure of power in healthcare to a flat table where everyone has a voice. That is important work to do, but as you might imagine, not the easiest thing to accomplish.
This slide reminds us that as in our healthcare curriculum and our basic science talks and stuff, that we can, take every opportunity to highlight where these different outcome disparities happen based on race, gender, or income, and or other characteristic. So, for example, this slide shows that you're 3 times more likely to die of asthma if you're Black than if you're not. And other things we might highlight would be, say, the difference in suicide attempts and outcomes in LGBTQ youth, and focusing on like how might that be, where might this problem arise from, what might impact and improve that. So different ways that we can, when these things exist in this, as we're on a behavioral health curriculum, point them out, and rather than always keep everything focused on the majority population.
We also want to consider who's at the table. And I'm talking about the demographic table. So when you think of the demographic table in research, clinical research, social science research, health outcomes research, you generally, it's sharing of evidence from these different studies. And so it's essential, one, to highlight the diversity in the population studied, but then also to explore how that diversity or lack thereof affects the quality of the study. And so there's actually 2 sides to this. So one being in the actual demographic table and those that are represented. So the effects of diversity that are increasingly being seen in genetics research and whatnot, it's interesting in that, one, we're calling for more diversity, but we're also calling to look at more than just what we are saying is race, which is our social construct. And you've seen this in countless different studies. There was a study, there are some different examples that look at how, like warfarin, the dosing information is based on the select gene variants involved in metabolism, but then they're also finding that the underrepresentation of African Americans in this research results in the absence of important metabolic altering variants prevalent for this population. But interestingly enough, so well, back onto this. So the algorithm that they used, they had lower therapeutic utility in African Americans. And so as I guess, educators and trainers of those in medicine and healthcare, we can address students' concerns regarding the validity of different findings as applied to patients whose data is actually missing from the original research. So including different groups to the table or within the research, and helping to make those research, that research to be more generalizable. And in doing so, it aids students in developing just this strong understanding of social determinants of health as they pertain to evidence-based practices. But also on the flip side, as we said before, we stated just race being this social construction, correct? And within medicine and public health and even social science, we've often inappropriately attributed racial disparities in health outcomes to this genetic or biological differences related to these racial categories. Or they're left to the summary of it's just open to that specific conclusion. But the social categories of race are they're a proxy, a really horrible proxy for genetic differences is what I'm getting at. And so the interpretation, it requires clarity of thought. So these racial categories, they don't have a biological basis, as we essentially said in the beginning of talking about the complicated schematic, looking at healthcare outcomes. Either of you want to add on to that? Hopefully I described both sides of.
Right, I was just, I think that sometimes there are differences and that are, the reason for the difference may even pertain to like the social determinants of health impacts on the biology of a person. And some may be, population-based level variance. But in general, like you won't be able to figure out if there is a difference in how somebody responds to a certain drug or whatever the study is, if you're not on the you're not in the study. The demographic table is where we record the characteristics of who signed up for our study. And the representation there has a lot to do with trust as well, because there have been well-known historical examples of the abuse of that trust in terms of the Tuskegee syphilis study being the most well-known. And so what all of this has to do with disparities in, well, how do you make sure that people feel safe to participate in research trials? That's all I wanted to say.
So I think that brings us to what our goal was today, is to just give a little snapshot of what we are trying to do in our little piece of the world. We said at the beginning we would kind of bring things back to a couple of final interactive slides. But before that, there's one more slide I forgot. Sorry, Dr. Maya, go ahead.
We were just saying, what does it take to do this kind of curricular work? And it takes focus and commitment, sort of, especially at a top level, like the deans and the people who have control, curricular deans and deans for our different colleges, to be committed to integrate this content throughout. I think when it's a one-off, it's like today we're going to talk about this special population, that it makes it feel like, well, this is an exception, rather than something that should just be something we think about every day. And so it takes that embrace by people in leadership, that course directors and so on, to make this happen. And then, what I'm sure some of you have been thinking is, by the way, have you remembered that we live in Tennessee? Has anybody noticed there was a recent Tennessee law that might impact our ability to do these things? And perusal of that law shows that we are allowed to teach material that is a legitimate part of an academic discipline. USMLE content outline kind of guides what we're supposed to put in a medical school curriculum, at least on the medical school level. And sure enough, there it is. There is in that content outline that we're supposed to include healthcare policy, including disparities, race, ethnicity, numeracy, literacy, socioeconomic status, access to care, and so on. So it's there. We have permission. So so that'll be our defense. And now getting back to some ways to bring it on home to, we want to invite you. We've been giving you some examples of ways we're trying to create and enhance our curricular offerings in ETSU Health in a way that will hopefully transform the thinking of our trainees so that they can become like advocates and become change agents for health equity during their careers. So now we want to invite you to imagine with us, what might this look like in areas that you influence and that you occupy? Now you can get to your Mindy slides.
You're muted, Brian.
2.5 years later, he still doesn't remember. So to wrap things up, what we hoped to do is just a couple more interactive slides before we go to Q&A, and just ask everyone here, what would this look like if you were to try to tackle this process back at your home college or department? And let me say, if it's easier to simply raise your hand or unmute and speak, we're totally cool with that as well. The first response says incorporating diverse examples and trying to bring in discussions of current issues like the water crisis. It's a great example. I think one of the things we hope to bring to everyone's attention is I think it seems like obvious in the healthcare learner space. I think that this is a topic that is ripe and easy. I think the slide that we were discussing about having quotes from specific different people within courses is a great way and a great example. Any other thoughts that someone might have either in the chat or to volunteer? I love the second answer. I think that's a really great way to get at things where you're trying to dispel something, is to sort of bring up a myth and then provide the data that defends or shows that this is a myth. So yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a great idea. More diversity in simulated patient encounters. I'm glad, I don't know who said that, but I have a feeling who said that. When Patty was talking about the mannequin and our struggle in not having a mannequin of color, I'm pretty sure I know who said that answer, but that's also a problem that we have for anyone who maybe is not familiar with Sarah's. They're actors who play the role of a patient, human. So the dynamic nature of the interaction is a wonderful, beautiful thing for our students. Unfortunately, the lion's share, the majority of all of the people we use for standardized patients are not of color. And so it absolutely, I think, not on purpose, but sort of, I think, shows our students like, this is what all of your patients in East Tennessee are going to look like. The last one, I am not in an academic college, but in the division of research, we would do more to encourage broad participation in research and provide educational opportunities to promote DEI in research endeavors. I think that's a huge statement. I totally agree. As Dr. Johnson alluded to, this is a place that is really, really ripe and needed for expansion, not just at ETSU, but across the country. Next, how can you build equity inclusion into the offerings that you have influence over? And I think part of what we were thinking about here is what partnerships do you need? Who do you need to be on your team? What buy-in do you need? I think we would all agree when you're doing something new in a curriculum, there's an awful lot of reasons why not to do it from both faculty and administration. Change is never wonderfully received because it suggests there's going to be work for people to do and all of those kinds of things. Wow, I love that phrase. Reimagine the curriculum, prepare students to live in a world that challenges their worldview. Yes, that's a major statement. For whoever said that, would you be willing to say what details might look like when you say reimagine the curriculum? So the second statement says, I have very little influence, and I would argue everyone has more influence than they think. But try to not use the same 17th and 18th century scientists as the only examples of innovation. Amen. That is, yes, that's just, that's sort of just the basics of having an up-to-date curriculum, isn't it? But that's, again, more easily said than done. I think a lot of us get comfortable in the space of our what it is that we're teaching and stay in those kind of places. And along those same lines, talking about having voices of different backgrounds, this is another great example. I was speaking with someone, I think in the English department, and with great intention, they put all of the authors that they were going to be reading from and dealing with that semester were intentionally chosen to not be white and not be male. And not until they got to the end of the semester was there a discussion about, so number one, now that you know this as a student, does it change anything in how you're perceiving? I just thought it was a great intentional change in their process of teaching. Last person says, use real life examples, cases of inequity and non-inclusion in course materials. Totally agree. Patty or Kiana, do either you have something to say about that last statement?
I wanted to say something about the middle one, which was that and medicine is very wanting to honor, there's all these different things that have somebody's name on it. And the person's name is generally a white male European. In fact, it's always that, pretty much always. So not even pretty much, just it is. So I love that middle comment about that topic. And we had a wonderful visitor to our campus just recently that was an example of a modern innovator that had made a really groundbreaking discovery in HIV research. And so bringing people like that to campus is really inspiring and encouraging our students to attend, even if you have to manipulate them with extra credit.
Dr. Johnson, any thoughts on the last bar?
No, not really. I mean, I do like Patty's example, just talking about Dr. Mario's example of talking about Dr. Can somebody pronounce his name? The CEO of Meharry, president of Meharry.
I'm blanking on his name, but he was wonderful.
Yes, just the different examples that he provided, but then even also highlighting a lot of the different things that we're discussing. You know, that's a really great example. And even looking at, so the real life examples, I mean, even within the news, more recently, in these different advances, showing how some things that may have been innovative in making things more convenient, like the thermometers, and then also looking at the oximeters, looking at how that can continue to perpetuate these different things. So are we considering different populations when we're creating these different tools or equipment, and how do these things work in these different populations? So making sure that, I mean, because looking at these different examples that we're now seeing, it's kind of like a no-brainer almost. Like, oh, why didn't they consider that to begin with? Or even just continuing just to get the input of those of individuals within the populations that we're looking at. So like going back to the table.
Yeah.
Dr. James Hildreth was the presenter we had from Meharry.
Yes. So we have about 9 minutes left. I want to throw this last question at everybody. This is more of a big picture. So if there was 1 or 2 words that you could say, like this is the focus, this is the issue, this is the department, this is the person. What couple of words best describes what our university could do to shift the culture toward more equity, curricularly or otherwise speaking? The other thing I'll just remind everyone is Kim has placed in the chat a link to the evaluation for today, and I am sure they would appreciate greatly you all filling that out. So Dr. Johnson and Dr. Amadio, this reminds me of when I'm using the same tool to interact with students and there's this long pause. I love that. Thank you. We could spend the next hour just talking about how difficult that phrase that is now in our word cloud is. All 3 of us have been in various meetings and talking groups. It's one thing to say increase our diversity in hiring. It's another thing to say what are all of the things that contribute to why this area struggles with hiring diversity within our ranks.
And not only hiring, but retaining.
I was just going to say that. Yep. So is this a place that is welcoming? Is it a place that culturally would allow a multitude of different kinds of people to thrive? Inclusive curriculum. Embrace differences. I love these phrases. Yeah, I think we would all agree that the last several years, not just in our region, but in our country, we are struggling with the idea of embracing anyone who is different and not looking at them as other instead of something that I could learn from, learn more about, etc. The last thing that just got posted said more action and less talk. I think that is a common phrase we hear when we start talking about academic anything. Change management. So I'm gonna take a stab at what I'm think that means, but feel free, anyone, to interrupt. I think what that is saying is we need structure from top to bottom that creates a process when we're going to do something different, and not just maybe hope or speak, but that there's a plan of action and that there are things that can be measured and processes that can be used to assess whether the goals that we set forward are actually coming to fruition. So with that, I would like to ask Dr. Johnson and Dr. Amadio, if you guys have any sort of final parting comments. I'm going to mute and let you guys go.
No, but I think we should just invite some questions, unless Dr. Johnson has something from our listeners, who we appreciate your attentiveness. You want to stop your screen share so we can see each other better? Thanks.
Yes, do you all have any questions or comments or suggestions that you care to share at the moment? I think that's a no.
Well, we would just like to thank Dr. Johnson, Dr. Cross, and Dr. Cross for this wonderful presentation. Again, feel free to provide us with feedback so we can continue to bring content like this for the Lunch and Learns. Also, just a reminder, on next Tuesday, November 15th, is our final Lunch and Learn for the fall semester. But again, we appreciate our presenters on today, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.